hides under a blanket the whole time, and then like problem solved. And occasionally they like pan to her for a goofy joke, and that's it. She's never seen again. Well, that's not great, right? She's like a joke character, and like in the anime version, I think she takes her classroom. She sits in a different classroom, so she doesn't have to be around people and just like hides under the blanket the whole time. And anytime you see her, it's like weird because they're all like, "Oh yeah, she's here too." It's like, oh, that's not good. But that's, you know, the other thing though, the weird part about this, and I only realized this fairly recently, actually a well-liked character for people who have seen the show, which for me, I was like, oh yeah, like that one character from Zetsuba Sensei, right? When I was in college, I wrote a paper on Hikikomori, and I was like, that's the reason I did. And I was like, because I'm going to cite anime as a scholarly source. It's okay. It's fine. It worked out. But people actually like this character. There's like fan art, and I'm not going to, don't Google it, but there's fan art, and there's like people that like it. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Safe search is on. It's good. So it's a well-liked character. So like, not a great portrayal, but maybe people that connected to this character somehow. And then also, one of the more current ones, and I say more current because Eden of the East was like 2008, 2009, which I realized was like 9, 10 years ago, but it's okay. It's recent to me. This character whose literal name in the show is Panties. Yep, that's a thing. It's actually Pants or Pantsu if you're in Japan, but you know, his name is Panties, right? That's not his actual name, but that's his name. And everybody calls him that because it's supposed to be a goofy, derogatory sort of nickname, right? And in the show, he is a overweight character, he is goofy, and he's a comic relief. And he consistently is not wearing actual clothing that you would use to go outside in. You know, he's always in his underwear and a wife beater or whatever. Not great. But he's competent, at least. And one of the things is, he's a NEET, and he's proud of it. And so that's part of it. So he's a NEET, he's a Hikikomori. And he's actually isolated for a reason. There's plot reasons for it. But he's actually really competent. He's a computer hacker, and he helps get to the bottom of a lot of things that are plotted in the show. He's also in the movies, as far as I'm aware. So he's not just a one-off character. He's a side character, but he's a good person. He's, you know, despite the fact that he's goofy, despite the fact that they make fun of him occasionally, he's a good guy. So that's positive, right? We like this. We like a positive character, even though he's goofy, even though he's overweight, and there's negative stereotypes, and he's got like a cruddy, patchy beard of a, you know, kind of a neck beard situation going on. Not great, but it's better, right? So that's a positive one. And then the most recent one that I can think of, really, or at least the most recent one that I wanted to portray, is No Game, No Life, right? First thing, they're like, we're Hikikomori, it's great. And Sora and Shiro are well-liked in their main characters, right? They're hyper-competent. Sora doesn't lose at all, right? Because he's so good at gaming, right? They're goofy, they're played for laughs, they're both kind of jokey, you know, have some problems as characters, but they're competent, they win all the time. They're primary characters of a show that was like pretty underrated, but was still really popular, right? And that's a good thing, because if you can show people like, hey, this is an okay thing to be, not necessarily that we want to encourage it, but if you can show people like there are positive versions out there that you can learn from this and do different things to your life, that's an important thing. And I was actually reading a version where people were talking about characters in shows, and one of them was like, sort of in a way that I didn't agree with, but it was like, but the power of friendship, and I'm like, But they're like, but the power of friendship, and you can learn from these characters, and I was like, yes, learning from characters, that's good, we like that. But I would say like this sort of has a progress bent to it, right? Because if you go in order, where you got like a main antagonist who's a bad person who tries to harm people, to like main characters who try to help other people and are kind and have positive role model traits, and like that's a good thing. And this is in 20 years, right? This is the history of it, which is helpful because like it's not that long, so I don't have to go through it. But 20 years of and this is, you know, pop culture, right? This is how we're being shown these characters, and I think that's important because one of the things the world will show you, if you show up for something and you want to see something, they'll show it to you, right? If you want more representation in movies, people are going to do that if you show up to see that movie, right? Black Panther made $1 bazillion. And you know what the conclusion of any person who sees the box office return is? Let's make more Black Panther movies, right? And they're going to make 6 of them, and they're going to suck. I'm just kidding. They're going to make 6 of them, and you're going to be tired of it by the end. But the thing is, if you vote with your dollar, if you show up, if you tell people that's what you want, that's what they're going to do. And also, this might reflect some author things going on, right? The people that write these series change over time just like you or I do. And if their opinions of this are changing, this might tell us maybe how pop culture or cultural generally is changing about how people get about Hikikomori. So, modern research. So now we're going to get to the research part of this. So we talked about culture, and let's talk about how people are researching it. Because one of the things is there's a lot of problems with it. So one of the problems is it a Japanese thing or not? So some people are like, yeah, obviously, right? Because it only happens in Japan. Therefore, it's a Japanese thing. Well, kind of. Kind of a thing. Also, people argue about what even is going on here. There are people that have knockdown, drag-out fights, and by fights I mean they yell at each other in internet research papers. But they have knockdown, drag-out fights about what is even going on here. And they'll fight to the death to claim their position. And also, what do we do to help people, right? Because this is important. We can fight all about what this looks like, but what we should probably be working on is what can we do to help people? How do we get these people back into society feeling better about themselves, right? Because the good part about other disorders is there's a lot of treatments. If you go to depression, you know what the most common depression treatment is? They'll give you therapy, they'll give you pills, because those two things are shown to be the most effective thing. There's no most effective thing for Hikikomori yet. So that's one of the other things that we'll talk about. And we'll talk about my own research, because again, I'm an egotistical person, and I get to talk about my own stuff, because this is my panel, right? So I didn't make this just for thing. I Googled Japan, image search, and it came up with that incredible country, which Japan is apparently described by geishas, people getting pushed into subway trains, clanad, karaoke, Tamagotchis, women hanging out with robots, and anime. That sound right? You're like, yeah, those are the things that we came to the con for, right? Fine, you do you. Not going to judge. But yeah, so people have this argument, right? Is it just in Japan? So some people, the obvious version is because I've said Japan throughout the entirety of this thing, your answer would probably be like, yeah, probably. Or unless you know somebody and you're like, I have this friend who doesn't leave their house and now I'm concerned. Also fine. But the thing is that almost every case of this that has ever happened in the history of it, which is only like 20 years, but virtually every case is a Japanese young person in Japan. So that would tell you it's probably a Japanese thing, right? The word to describe it is in Japanese. Right? So that's what some people would say. Also, if you ask people like, hey, you ever seen any Hikikomori around here? They're going to look at you like you grew a second head because they don't know what you're talking about. It's unknown outside of Japan. Even professionals, doctors, mental health professionals. You ask them about this, they're like, the what? Bless you, I think? I don't know. So there's that part of it too. The other piece would be that it's unique to Japan somehow. In psychology, we have what were called culture-bound disorders. And there's some of them that are common that are like, this is a thing, but it only happens for this group of people. So you ever heard the phrase running amok? Amok is a psychological disorder. And it only happens in like one specific population. You don't see it anywhere else. You can't see it anywhere else because it only exists in that population. So some people would say Hikikomori is like that. It can't exist somewhere else because it's only Japanese.
So false.
Yeah, so. But there's other people that say like, well, that's not true. Because the thing is, there have been cases in other cultures. So some of them are in cultures that are more collectivistic, right? So they're like, well, they're saying like, well, it's maybe not Japanese, but it's like Japanese-like cultures. So that's part of it. But there's been cases in other places as well. There's been in Western countries as well. So there's cases in the United States as we're speaking. There's cases in Spain, in France, in a number of other places. There's research articles written by people in other countries that say, well, actually, this is happening, right? Which is great, but also terrible, because then you have to Google translate a whole article from Spanish because you don't know how to Spanish. And then Google translates, you know, iffy at best. So you're like, why are they talking about this? Oh, it's a mistranslation, right? The other thing, too, is if you ask people, do you see this? If you don't say Hikikomori, if you describe what you're seeing, people that isolate themselves, severe isolation, they don't go to school, whatever, right? If you describe that, and someone did this, they did a research study where they sent it around the world to people, doctors, mental health people, and every single one of them was like, yep, that happens. So if only the cases are in Japan, but everyone in the world is like, well, that totally exists in my country. I see it all the time. Maybe what we're saying is like, well, people just don't know the right terminology, but it's still out there. One of the other things that comes in here is the internet. So if you remember this far back, in 1999 to 2000, what was going on in the world?
.com. dot-com boom.
The dot-com boom, right? The economy was great, in America at least, because Mark Cuban made $12 quadrillion, right, selling internet. I don't think he sold the internet, right? Al Gore had to invent it, but yeah, it was a dot-com boom, billions of dollars around the world in the internet. Internet was becoming a huge thing. It was part of people's everyday life. But this is interesting because the disorder starts to be defined right around that same time, which some people would say like, well, that's just a coincidence. Actually, if you look around the world, and different countries have gotten different levels of internet sort of integration into life, right? So we've been at it for a while, because America is like one of the first adopters, right? But if you look at countries that adopted the internet later, you start to see hikikomori and hikikomori-like symptoms when their internet connectivity goes up. So some people are like, well, this is clearly internet addiction, because internet. And their argument might be kind of on to say like, it might be related, right? Because it's, does anyone remember what you had to do before Netflix? Blockbuster. You had to go into a store. I know, it's horrible. You had to go into a store and find the video or the DVD you needed. And God help you if somebody else checked it out, right? But if you were like, you had to leave your house for a lot more things. Now the internet's a thing, and just like, whatever, I want this. Amazon will just stream it to me, or send it to me, or whatever, right? So that's a thing that goes in here that people will talk about. So, also the what is it argument. This is a gentleman who is a hikikomori, but oddly wearing an American flag tank top. Seems fine, ironic maybe, but whatever. Right? Some people will say, well, it's unique. It's its own thing. Hikikomori should be a definitional thing. It should be in the book as its own thing. Right? Some people say that. Some people would also otherwise say, though, that it's really more, it's something that exists that we know already. Like some people say it's depression. This is what depression looks like. It's just a different kind of depression. And some people actually used to call it Japanese depression. Which is like a little, because like, I've decided that Japanese depression looks like this, right? But there's actually some evidence to say that similar things can happen, right? Because there's different cultures that wouldn't go into a doctor and say, hey doc, I'm feeling sad. But they go into the doctor and say like, doctor, my body feels run down, I feel terrible. And what that actually is like, there's no medical reason for you to feel bad, it's psychological, right? And so there's some evidence that says that could be the case. And the other part that people go on with is like, there's just no cases anywhere else, right? If there's no cases anywhere else and it's just in Japan, that means it's its own Japanese thing, right? But also one of the other things that has come up since hikikomori has become really known, it's sort of used like depression is in the United States, right? You ever talk to somebody about mental health and they're like, oh, depression, right? Depression is like the most commonly known one. You talk about any mental health thing, they're like, yeah, like I had a cousin that was depressed, right? And like maybe that's not related to what you were talking about, but that's the thing that people know. And hikikomori is like that in Japan now. They're like, oh, I had to go see a psychologist. And they're like, oh, hikikomori. I'm like, what? No. But that's a thing. It's a commonly known thing, and people talk about it that way. And it's actually become the way that people go in and talk to doctors, right? So they might go in to talk to a psychologist and be like, doctor, hikikomori. And you're like, not really. But you're this, and I can help you with that, right? So you have people go in and like they have an anxiety disorder or something, right? But they go in and they say hikikomori, and it actually gets them where they need to be. So that's good. We like that. But that might be playing into people's arguments here. Also, some people go into this idea of like chicken or the egg, right? Is the withdrawal the thing, or is the withdrawal the symptom of the thing? Which the guy, Dr. Saito, who originally defined it, said, this is a symptom. This is a symptom of something else. But since people have changed their minds and said like, well, it's probably the thing itself. Because the problem is, if you say it's a symptom, what is it a symptom of? Right? And you ever been to a doctor where like they couldn't figure out what was wrong with you for a hot second? Right? Because like, well, I feel chills and I'm coughing. Okay, well that's the flu. Or it's this, or it's you have cancer, or you have lupus, or right? There's like 17 different things it could be. And that's part of the problem here, is if you say like, they're isolating themselves, and you're like, yeah, but because reasons, or because other reasons? And that's one of the things that goes in here, it's not always linked. And also people will say, is it something else? So there's a lot of people that say it's depression, right? Because it feels like it makes sense. You don't want to talk to people, you're sad, you go by yourself, you get to have your own emotional experience, you don't go out, depression, right? People with depression don't leave the house sometimes. Problem solved, right? Kind of. Because some people also say anxiety, right? Because if I told you someone didn't want to leave their house and they never do, what are you going to think they have? What do you see at that? Agoraphobia, right? It's afraid to leave the house. So you see that on TV a lot. Like Monk. Anyone ever watch that? Shameless, first season. First couple seasons? Yeah. But, yeah. But you see that a lot. So people, you talk about this, they're like, oh, it's like agoraphobia. That's an anxiety disorder. Like, well, kind of. Yeah, maybe it is. I don't know. There's also another one that people go at, which is dissociative disorders, which are things like psychosis and things like that, or what people used to call multiple personality disorder. Some people think it's related to that as well, which there's less research on, but it's an interesting idea that people will talk about. And there's a lot of work that's gone into that, and none of these have really been proven correct or anything, but this is sort of the argument that people are having. The other one is, how do you treat this, right? So we talked about how they'll just abduct you and throw you in a group home, right? Yeah, I didn't say group home, but I did say abduct. I'm pretty sure I did. But the first idea was like, okay, so here's the thing. We're a collectivist culture, right? And there's lots of other Hikikomori out there. So the brilliant idea is, let's abduct your child. I would stop there, but we're going. They're going to abduct their child, and they're going to put them in this group home with other Hikikomori. And now you're like, that's a dumb idea. Because if it's a bunch of Hikikomori, what's going to happen? Nothing! Well, kind of. That is part of the problem. But one of the things is they'll take you and they put you in this group home. But the other people in the group home are also Hikikomori. But they're also at different stages of getting better, right? So some of them have been there for a while. Some of them are brand new. But they put you in this group home, and they're like, hey, you can stay in your room. This is your room now. You can stay in it for as long as you want. But we're doing stuff out here. No pressure. At any time you want to come out and do stuff, we can do stuff. We're just going to go over here and play Monopoly, and you can hang out in your room. And what happens eventually is they do stuff, and they get involved with other people that are like them, and that are getting better. And you see that over and over again. You see it's not scary. You see it could be fun. And they come out eventually. So that's the good part. It's like, it was well-intentioned. It's just that they also kind of committed a felony.
What?
You know, abducting people's not a good thing. Don't do that. You go to jail. You'll get a dime. It's bad. But that's what happened. And they would eventually coax you out of your isolation. And then once they have you out, they can talk about stuff, and they can do different things and say, okay, let's work on this. Let's get you treatment. Let's get you connected with a job. Let's do these things. And that's what happened. They would try to do that. Also, one of the other things in the original book that defines the disorder, talking about getting family help, right? And not just like family therapy, like the traditional, like you sit around and all talk about your problems and junk, but like also the parents going to get therapy. Because what do you think is going to be hard to do if your kid doesn't leave their room? Talk to them, that's one of them, right? Because they're not going to open the door to talk to you, right? Which again, in my house wouldn't fly, right? Because then like, now your room doesn't have locks. Congratulations. But, so if your kid won't talk to you, what are they also not going to do?
Get a job.
Probably not going to get a job. Where are they not going to go with you, though?
Therapy?
They're not going to go to therapy with you, right? They're not going to go to the doctor with you. And actually, it's funny because the doctor who originally came up with this was like, what you should do is just tell your kid you're going to therapy. You say like, look, we want to help you, but we know we can't force you out of there. But we are going as a family to therapy. You can come with us. If you don't want to, that's okay, we're still going. And the idea is eventually like, okay, my parents are trying to help me. They're trying to get better themselves. So the idea eventually is that they would join as well. And that's a thing that comes in where you either do family therapy or the family parents get help themselves, or parents and siblings, if that's the case, get help themselves and learn how to help their child, which is another thing that people bring in. Also, normal things like going to therapy yourself and talking about how that makes you feel and your mother and stuff also helps. The totally normative, pitched right down the middle American psychotherapy version totally works. Also, medication therapy works as well. So typically what you see in the United States, especially for mental health treatment, is like things like depression or other severe issues. You go get therapy, they'll give you medication, right? You do both of them, that's the proven most effective thing. Eventually they want to take you off medication, but you know, it's later on. But that works. And there's actually been cases in the United States where they've given people depression medications and depression-based therapies, and they got better. They left their room. So that's a piece of it that we know works. We don't necessarily know why it works or that it's the best thing, but we know that it does work. The other one is social support, right? So if you're stuck in your room and it sucks, what can you use the internet to find? Friends, right? The internet can be a big social support for a lot of people. It still is this way. Mental health is a big thing. You ever seen the app that, like, you can get an app to email your therapist or text your therapist, right? Don't necessarily endorse that thing, but that exists. And that's the thing, is you can use that to get social support. But you can also try to give social support outside, right? Anyone, you ever seen TV, right, of like Alcoholics Anonymous, right? They have groups where people go talk about, like, hi, I'm Frank, I'm an alcoholic, right? Similar things exist for Hikikomori. You can go and talk to other people that have it, and you can get supports that you would need. You can get help finding a job, you can get help getting back into education if that's what you want to do. Those kind of supports are out there, because often they are needed. Because if you don't have a college degree and you don't have any job skills, it's going to be really hard for you to get a job. So there's a lot of resources that connect to try to get people back into society in certain ways, which is another way to approach the problem. So, let's talk about my research here for a second. Because again, it's all about me. I'm very important, right? I have a badge that looks the exact same because they don't change it, but it's not. Some of the ones have ones that say panelist, which makes you feel more important. Anyway, but my research is one of the things I did, and this is my most recent study. The idea was like, well, what leads people to isolate? Or what keeps people isolated? Because we don't really know. If you ask people different things, and people have different ideas. People say depression, people say anxiety, right? But what causes this, or what leads people to stay that way? And so my idea had this model that had been previously used by one of my research mentors. But the idea was like, there's different factors. There's things you think in your head, right? The thoughts you have. There's actions you perform in reaction to your own thoughts or in reaction to other things. And then there's feelings, right? Your emotional feelings. You're sad, you're angry, you're feeling ashamed, you're guilty, those kind of things. And the idea was that between these three factors, that something significant is going on in one or more of them that maybe leads you to be isolated. And so that's what we were looking at here. And the idea was, I'm going to give you this thing and check out where you are on these three factors, right? So what are you thinking about? What are you feeling in that moment? What are you doing? And the idea here is if I give you these things and then I can measure how isolated you are, that probably if you're feeling really upset emotionally or really upset in your thoughts, that might translate out. And so the idea here is like, okay, well, can we predict that then? Because that's what they want. If you do psychology research, they're like, yeah, that's great. You prove two things are related, but that's stupid. Because that doesn't mean anything. Because palm size and reading ability are related, right? Correlation isn't causation. That doesn't mean the same thing you want it to. But the idea is like, okay, can we predict it? And when I did my research, it came out that when we're looking at the sample I had, that these factors accounted for 25% of how people were isolating. And I know 25% seems small, but 25% in psychological research is like, holy crap, you found the holy grail. You're the best at this, right? Because if I explain 25% of anything, that's kind of important. Like, what if 25% of you being hungry was you didn't eat for a long time? But there's other things too, right? You're relying on good food, you've been expending energy, right? Explaining 25% of something is important. And that's what we found here was like, these factors suggest that 25% of stuff, that a quarter of how people experience isolation can be explained by these factors. But that also means that there's probably other things going on. Probably a lot of other things. And so that's one of the things we got at here. One of the things I wasn't looking for, though, because that was my research thing, so I had to do a research and be like, look, I did a thing, right? And they kind of expect you to not find anything, so you can be like, well, I did a thing, but I suck. So it's okay. But when you find something, you're like, well, what does that mean? And one of the things that came in here is when I'm looking at it, there's a question that asks people how they experienced their isolation. Was it okay? Was it bad? Was it really bad? And around 50% of the students that took their surveys said that they experienced significant social isolation. 50% of college students. These were mostly freshmen, underclassmen. But 50% of them said they feel socially isolated on a fairly regular basis. That's a lot of people, even if it's a fluke, because it might be, right? But even if it's a fluke, it's a lot of people. If I said 50% of anything, that's a huge number of things. If I did it on a campus that had 15,000 students, that's 7,500 people who feel bad about this, right? And so the other part of that came out is around 20% of them said they experienced severe social isolation. Not necessarily that 20% were hikikomori or close to it, but if we're thinking percent of percent of percent, if 1% of that population is that severe, that's a lot of people. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but like the actual prevalence rate, when Dr. Saito wrote his book, he said, I think around 1% of the Japanese population has this. And people were like, that's completely insane. If 1% of the Japanese population had anything, we would know about it. But like, would you though? If they're isolated, would you know that they're isolated? Sort of with the argument. But that was my research thing. We're still working on it. We're going to do more stuff, but food for thought. So let's talk about why this matters. So I've talked to you a lot of times, and y'all have been a great audience, just sitting there like nodding occasionally and occasionally saying things, which I appreciate. Because as someone who teaches college, god dang, man. There's a lot of people who just like sleep. And like, that's cool, man, I get it, but like, I'm at my work here, man. I don't come into like Fridays and sleep on the table where you work. Come on. I don't care, man. You paid to be here. I get paid the same way ever. I don't get paid for this. But why does this matter, right? So the one thing that Dr. Saito came up with is like, there might be millions of young people that are dealing with this. Millions, with an M, right? And the idea here is that they are silent and that they are suffering. The majority of them are. Because they don't come into the doctor's office to see you, right? They're stuck in their rooms. Their parents don't report it. They don't seek help in the same way they want. That's a lot of people. And for context, Dr. Saito said at a 1% rate, if 1% of the population has it, which is similar to other mental or psychological disorders, similar, at a 1% rate with current populations, that means 1.3 million people in Japan have it. It's a lot of people. If I said 1.3 million, anyone had anything, people would start to lose their minds. We had the election recently, right? If 1.3 million people were going to vote for something a certain way, people would pay attention, right? If you take that to Japan, take that to the United States and say 1% of the United States population, it's 3.2 million people. Again, a lot of people. And even if it's a percentage of that, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. So it's a big deal. There's a lot of people and we don't know how to help them very effectively. And we need to know more about this, because if we're seeing it in Japanese media, and we've continued to see it, or seen it at a different rate across 20 years, that might tell us something about what's going on. And just doing research alone doesn't cover it all, right? Half the things I talked about were anime and manga and stuff. And that's important, because you got people who are like doctors, who are like interested in it for doctor reasons, or because a person will pay them money to do research on it. But how do you know who to pay to do the research? How do you know it's still going on, right? If I watch a show that was released this year and has a character that has it, I'm pretty sure it's still going on, right? So there's that kind of piece. Also, we need more research, because as it spreads across the world, as the internet spreads, you start to see this pop up places. And clinicians say they see it everywhere. And most of the people aren't even connected with the definition we're talking about, don't have the information that we talked about today. Which, if you had a doctor who was going to try to treat you for cancer, and they had a 45-minute lecture about cancer once, right? That would be good, right? Or if they didn't even have that, right? They read about it in a book one time, or they saw it on TV on Grey's Anatomy, right? Not good. We don't like that. So there's that piece of it as well, that we have to educate people. And part of the thing of coming here to educate, besides the fact that they'll pay for me to be here, right? The other thing is, educating people is important. That if you go out and y'all fucking mention one time of like, wow, that was kind of cool, we talked about this thing, right? If that spreads out, you're going to have more people talking about it. And more people talking about it leads to more interest and more research and all that good stuff. Also, the critical piece of it. We need to understand why we're being given messages. If you watch a show and a Hikikomori is a murderer and a cruddy person, you need to know why that is. It could be that they're just writing a character that way, right? That's okay. That's fine. But if you watched a show that had a certain kind of person who is always portrayed a certain way, that's coming from a place. It might not be a bad place, but it's coming from a place. And knowing why that's going on is really important, because we have to pay attention to what media we're given, especially if it's media that doesn't natively make sense to us. Anime and manga sometimes don't make any sense unless you read the translator notes, right? And they're like, actually, this is this, but like we couldn't find a way to translate that, so that we just left it, right? And so that's important as well. So I've got some bad news for you. We still got a lot to learn. There's not a lot going on. There's not a lot of research going on. Literally, I do it, and then like one other guy. He's like an actual doctor. It's crazy. But there's like me and like one other guy in English who do it. which means that number one, I don't read Japanese super good, so that's hard. Because like if the article's written in Japanese, what am I supposed to do with that? Pay someone to translate it, I guess, or Google Translate or whatever, but again, that's, also, it appears to be a worldwide phenomenon. If I see it in 5 or 10 different countries and doctors tell me they see it everywhere else, that leads me to believe that at least in some of those cases, they're going to be right and say like, yeah, then they have seen that. And so if they don't know what to do with it, that's a huge problem. That's something we can do. We need to do something more with. And also stigma, right? If the characters are always going to be negatively portrayed, this is bad. Because if we're looking at characters in our own history, right? People of different racial backgrounds historically have been treated very differently in media, right? And we've changed that over time to some degree. But if we're doing that here and saying like, well, that stigma's hurting people, actual people. It's funny, it's a funny joke that she never leaves her room, but also there's someone who's doing that right now who maybe needs a different message sent to them. So that's one of the things that we have to be aware of. But there's good news, right? So pop culture references seem to be getting a little bit better. In any series that I've looked at in the past few years, most of them are actually pretty decent. They give you more positive message, characters have positive traits, they have friends, they're liked, they're main characters, they're heroic, that's a thing. Also, people are putting research into effort into Hikikomori, and it's me and that one other guy, right? But the good part is the people that are doing the research are connected to each other for a lot of them. For a lot of history, there hasn't been. The last 20 years, those people weren't talking to each other. And when people don't talk to each other, if you've got people doing the same research study and not figuring out that they're doing the same thing and that they're talking about the same things, you're not going to learn anything, right? So that's good that they're starting to link that together. Also, awareness is up, right? So the TV specials, the pop culture, that's a thing that's been going, and it's been going for a while. And also treatment, right? We're learning that what things do work, which is my sort of area of interest because I want to do the actual work, right? I don't want to just do the research. So here's our next to last thing here. So this is what can you do, right? So you've sat through here, you've gotten the information, and you can just go home and just not think about it ever again, which is fine. Yeah, that's cool. But here are things you can do. So you can be critical about what you get, right? So when you see media, you could be like, why is that?
10 minutes.
You can think about that. Also, you can talk about it. If you see a character like that, you can be like, oh, hey, that's that. That's characters of Hikikomori, or they're doing something similar to that. Here's the actual truth of that, right? Also, one of the things that comes in here for Hikikomori, a lot of them don't speak for themselves, at least not in open ways that you or I would be exposed to. So maybe if you're on like an internet support group or something, they'll talk to each other, but we can have a voice in that conversation. That when we see negative portrayals or something, we can say something about it, even if it's not about us, right? Even if it's not just because it's my interest, right? Also, there's another thing where you can participate and you can be interested in stuff. So one of the things is if you show up to panels like this, they happen more, straight up. Because if 4 people showed up in this room and they were like, well, why did we give you a free pass if you just talked to 4 people? That's kind of dumb, right? But if you show up to stuff like this and you want to be educated, that content will show up for you. Happens, it's truth of life in a lot of different places. Also, though, there are research opportunities out here. So there's something called the International Anime Research Project. They do research on all of you. You go and fill out a survey, and they do research on that. And they do it in positive ways. I'm serious. So you know how people think anime people are nerds and losers? You're like, no. We're at an anime con. We're the cool people. You're right. But they do research and say, like, actually, the vast majority of people who like anime are productive and have good lives and friends and money and jobs, right? They can do research on this topic. And, well, some people might not listen to that, but that opportunity is out there. So I encourage you to take those opportunities if you see them. If people are looking for participants for a study, or if people are at a con handing stuff out, yeah, you can't just walk by them and no shame. But those opportunities are out there, and if you keep showing up for them, they'll keep showing up for you. People will spend money trying to do research on all of you, which is good, unless you don't want to. Then that's not good. But yeah, so that's all I got. So, we have a few more minutes for questions if you would like to do that, or if you're peace out, that is also good. That is my email. You can email if you have questions that you don't think about now, or if you would like a copy of the presentation or anything like that. So go back and then front with that. It's you, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering,
I know there's like a stigma, not just in Japan, but a lot of other countries for getting mental health, treatment.
Sure,
things like that. But I wonder how much of the hikikomori or niche problem is perpetuated by the attitudes of Japanese society, whether it's like the really overbearing work culture or family culture. Like, do you think there's like a relation to how this problem kind of perpetuates itself in how Japanese society, treats people?
Yeah, so the question being like, how much do you think those factors relate? And I think it's a lot. I think it's a significant amount. There's no research that really says like it's 60% or whatever. But I think it's a lot because there's unique factors going on, and those kind of attitudes develop for a reason, right? Subcultures happen for a reason. And I think that's a significant amount of it, especially the relationship towards work and family, like you were talking about, I think that's really important as well. Because if you're not working and you're not engaged with your family, that's a huge deal in Japan. And that's, a core problem in a lot of different things, whereas it would be viewed differently here maybe, or with different cultural groups. But I think that is a huge relationship, sure. You still going? Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you said this, but what is your major again?
So my major is in counseling psychology. I went to undergraduate and I was a psychology and history major, if you can believe it. Not Japanese history though, because they didn't have that. But yeah, and then I'm in counseling psychology, which is more like, sit down, tell me how about your mother kind of stuff. But yeah, we also do research as part of our thing. Yep.
What kind of questions did you ask on the survey to college students that led to the conclusion of the social isolation?
Yes, that's a good question. So what I used were instruments that already existed for things like thoughts about social interactions or feelings about social interactions. So part of it was those instruments that people had already created. But also there were some that were unique to us, like how many friends do you have? Like how many social connections? How often do you see your friends? That kind of stuff. Also ask them things like, what's your cultural background? What age are you? That kind of stuff. But samples would be things like, when I'm in a social interaction, I think that I'm inadequate, or I feel afraid of being in a large group of people, stuff like that. But there was separate ones for each one, if that makes sense. So each factor had their own few questions. Yep. Somebody else had one. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, to my understanding, Japanese welfare provides a roughly sustainable living for some people. Do you think that kind of enables some hikikomori, and do you think that can negatively impact welfare policy in Japan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably plays into it, because I think one of the things that rings really true for, say, like an American culture, no one's going to pay you money to do that. You're not going to get benefits, really. You could maybe get welfare, but yeah. But I think partially social welfare is a definite thing that people would talk about. I don't know that it's been examined that way, and that's a curious thing that I might want to look into. But I think you are right on that the policies being different could lead to people talking about those. Thinking maybe, for example, I could see a world where people think hikikomori are taking advantage of the system, right? Or that the system allows them to do that. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I think that is a good question. Yeah. Any other things for our last one? We got like one thing.
Did you see ReZero?
I have seen ReZero. I have not seen all of it, but I've seen it.
Like before he dies and goes to the world.
Spoilers. I'm just kidding. That's in episode 1.
Is he,
I'm just messing with it. Yeah.
Is he a hikikomori?
I think you can make the argument. I don't know that they ever say it in the show. It's been a while since I've watched it. But I think you can make the argument. A lot of those kind of like life in another world kind of things, typically the people are some sort